Number 1. In 1989, on the streets of Washington, D.C., the city they called the murder capital of America, drug dealers stopped driving nice cars. Not because they could not afford them, not because the police were watching, not because of any law, any task force, any crackdown. Because of one man. If this man saw you in something flashy, he assumed you had money. And if he assumed you had money, he was coming to take it. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. He would find out where you lived. He would walk to your house after dark. He would lay down in your yard, in the grass, behind the dumpster, in the bushes beside your front door, and he would wait. All night, not moving, not making a sound, just breathing, slow, patient, like a man with nowhere else to be. And when you walked outside in the morning, thinking it was just another day, thinking you were safe because the sun was up and people were around, he would stand up, walk straight towards you, close enough to see your eyes, and put 7 rounds in your head like it was nothing. Then he would walk away, not run, just walk. Sometimes he would come back 20 minutes later, after the police arrived, after the ambulance showed up, after the yellow tape went around the body. He would come back to the crime scene, stand on the corner, watch, make sure nobody was talking to the cops. And nobody was. Nobody ever was. Because everybody on that block knew exactly who had done it. And everybody on that block knew exactly what would happen to them if they opened their mouth. He did not do drive-bys. He did not shoot from across the street. He did not send somebody else to handle his business. He walked up to you, personally, face to face, and he did it himself, every single time. "I don't play that across the street business," he said. "I walk right up and put 7 in the head like it ain't nothing." The biggest dealer in D.C. tried to buy his loyalty. He refused. Hustlers who had been getting money for years stopped flashing in public because they did not want this man to notice them. He robbed lawyers. He extorted drug lords. He hunted killers the way other men hunted deer, patient and methodical, without a trace of hesitation. One of his associates opened his car trunk one day and found hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a rack of guns, and product. This man kept an arsenal the way most people keep a spare tire. The Washington Post called him one of the district's most heinous murderers. Don Diva magazine gave him a title that stuck, the Michael Jordan of the murder game. And in 2013, Jay-Z put his name in a verse on Magna Carta Holy Grail. This is my Wayne Perry flow. Y'all know nothing about Wayne Perry, though, District of Columbia. Suddenly, millions of people who had never heard of Southwest D.C. were searching for a man who had been locked in a concrete box for 20 years. His name was Wayne Perry. The streets called him Silk. But here's what Jay-Z did not rap about. Here's what the Washington Post did not print. Here's what the streets still talk about in a whisper. The most feared killer in the history of the murder capital was brought down by the one person he trusted with his life, the man he protected, the man he killed for, the man he kept alive in jail when everyone else wanted him dead. That man looked him in the eye, shook his hand, called him brother, and then walked into a federal office and gave them every name, every body, every detail. And the first name he gave them was Silk. Years later, from a prison cell at the most secure facility in America, he said 7 words that I keep coming back to. 7 words that tell you everything about this story and everything about the man who lived it. I am a very loyal man. He was. And that loyalty is what destroyed him. This is the story of Wayne Silk Perry, the man who hunted killers in the murder capital, and the lesson he learned too late about what loyalty gets you when you give it to a snake. To understand what Wayne Perry became, you have to understand where he came from. Not the man, the place. Because the place explains everything. Southwest Washington, D.C. Some people called it Chocolate City. Others called it Drama City. Most people just called it what it was, one of the worst ghettos in America. Tenement houses, fleabag motels, rat-infested apartment buildings. And on L Street, in the section they called 203, a stretch of blocks so bad that even the rest of Southwest didn't want to claim it. 203 had the worst violence, the worst crime, the worst of everything the city had decided to pour into one place and forget about. The people who grew up there had two ways out: sports or crime. That was it. No third option, no backup plan, no guidance counselor sitting you down to talk about college applications. You either had talent or you had nerve, and if you were lucky, you had both. Wayne Anthony Perry was born November 14, 1962. He grew up right there on L Street in 203 and spent his summers down in Georgia with family. But D.C. was home. And in D.C., from the time he was old enough to hold a bat, he was the best athlete anyone had ever seen. Baseball, boxing, basketball, football, MVP in everything he touched. His half-brother Lop gave him a nickname for how smooth he moved on the field: Silk. But here's the thing about growing up in 203. The older hustlers watched this kid play sports, watched him compete, watched him fight, watched how he carried himself, and they didn't see a future baseball player. They didn't see a scholarship. They didn't see a way out. They saw a weapon. They knew I'd shoot anybody, Silk told Don Diva magazine years later. Police, killers, guerrillas. I used to go on robberies with some serious gangsters, but they always took the bullets out of my gun because they said I was trigger happy. Let me say that again. Grown men, experienced criminals robbing banks, and they took the bullets out of the kid's gun before they went inside, because even they were afraid of what a 13-year-old Wayne Perry might do if the gun was loaded. By 1974, Silk was 12 years old and had already caught his first body. By 1975, he was hustling full-time. By 1976, he was running crooked dice games and marked card scams on grown men twice his age. The older gamblers took him everywhere because they thought the kid was lucky. He wasn't lucky. He was cheating them. And he was 14 years old. Silk attended Wilson High School, supposedly a place to get an education. In reality, it was a gladiator school. Northwest gangs versus Southwest gangs. Riots in the hallways every week. Unarmed guards in every corridor because the school couldn't afford anything better. One day a riot broke out. Somebody shot one of the guards. Police came. Every gangbanger in that hallway pointed at Silk. He insisted he didn't do it. He said the real shooters set him up because they knew he wouldn't snitch, and he would write it out. He was charged with attempted murder. The court dismissed it for lack of evidence. Wilson expelled him anyway. They sent him to Randall High School, where he played baseball, boxed, and played basketball and football. He was still the best athlete on every team he touched. Until one day at practice, he beat his baseball coach with a bat. Not a fist fight, not an argument that got out of hand. A bat, during practice, on the field, in front of the entire team. They didn't just expel him from Randall. They didn't just kick him off the team. They banned Wayne Perry from every single public school in the District of Columbia. A judge ordered him to attend Franklin GED school. According to Silk, somebody at Franklin made the mistake of threatening to take his chain. That person did not take the chain. By the late 1970s, school was over. Silk graduated to the streets. Bank robberies at 16. His little brother was killed by police inside a bank in 1979. Whatever thin wire had been holding Silk back from going all the way over, it snapped. It never reconnected. In 1984, a man came looking for Silk. He found him on the street. The man pulled a gun and fired. Missed. Silk didn't miss. He killed the man right in front of a parked police car. The officers sitting inside the car testified it was self-defense. A man shot dead on the sidewalk with police watching, and they called it self-defense. That tells you what Silk's reputation was in 1984. Even the police weren't going to argue with him, but it was still a body. They sent him to Lorton's Youth Center 1, one of the most violent prisons in America at the time. Going into Youth Center 1 was like going into a war zone. The inmates ran the facility. Kill or be killed. Not a metaphor, literal. Silk didn't just survive Lorton, he thrived. He came out in 1987 with a new skill set, a new reputation, and a new business plan. He wasn't going to hustle anymore. He wasn't going to rob banks. He wasn't going to play dice or run card scams. He was going to hunt people for money. And Washington, D.C., the city that was about to become the murder capital of the United States, had no idea what was walking back into it. You need to understand what D.C. was in the late 1980s, because without that context, what Silk did sounds like exaggeration. It's not. The crack epidemic had turned the nation's capital into a slaughterhouse. In 1991, Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders, 80.6 per 100,000 residents, the highest rate in the United States. They didn't call it Chocolate City anymore. They called it the murder capital, and that name was earned in blood. 482 bodies in a city of 600,000 people. If New York had the same rate, it would have been nearly 6,000 murders in a single year. D.C. was the most dangerous place in the United States, and it was not close. Rayful Edmond was flooding the streets with product. The shower posse was tearing up neighborhoods. Teenagers were dying on corners every single night. The police couldn't stop it. The government couldn't stop it. Nobody could stop it. And in the middle of all that chaos, while every dealer, every hustler, every killer in D.C. was making the most money they'd ever seen, there was one man who was scarier than all of it combined. Drug dealers stopped driving nice cars. Because if Silk noticed you, if Silk decided you had something he wanted, there was no negotiation. There was no paying him off. There was no talking your way out of it. Rayful Edmond, the single biggest supplier D.C. had ever seen, a man moving more product than anyone in the city, tried to buy Silk's loyalty. He dropped loads of supply down to 203. Free product, a peace offering from the most powerful dealer in Washington. Silk refused. Nah, I'm cool, I don't want nothing from you. Think about that. The most powerful dealer in the history of D.C. tries to buy you, tries to bring you into his operation, offers you a seat at the biggest table in the city, and you say no, not because you have a better deal, not because you're afraid of the heat, because you don't want to be owned by anyone. Silk wanted to make his own way. He had a game plan, and that game plan was simple. He would take what he wanted from anyone who was too weak to stop him. He would kill anyone who needed killing for the right price. And he would answer to nobody. Not Rayful Edmond, not the police, not the federal government. Nobody. Here's what made Silk different from every other killer in the murder capital. And there were hundreds. D.C. had bodies dropping every night. But nobody operated like Wayne Perry. Most killers are reactive. Somebody disrespects them, they react. Somebody moves on their corner, they react. Somebody snitches, they react. Silk was proactive. He did not wait for problems. He went looking for them. He hunted. One time, a friend had his corner taken over by a dealer from New York. The New Yorker told Silk's boy he could not hustle there until the New Yorker was done. Silk's friend came to him scared. Silk told the kid to go back outside and sell. The kid hesitated. Silk told him, "If I said it's cool, it's cool." The kid went back to the corner. The New York dealer came around the building to say something about it. Silk stepped out of the cut beside the wall and emptied every round in the clip into the man's head. Then he walked back inside and kept talking, like nothing happened. Another time he made a man strip naked in a mall. Broad daylight. People everywhere. He made the man choke off every piece of clothing and then shot him right there to prove to everyone watching that the man was not as tough as he claimed. He popped up at outdoor basketball tournaments and gunned down targets in the middle of a crowd. He killed at the lunch rush. He killed with police a block away. He killed on corners where 50 people were standing, and when he walked away, nobody saw a thing. And his trunk. One of his associates opened Silk's car trunk one day and found hand grenades, sticks of dynamite, a rack of guns, and product. This man kept a small arsenal in his car, the way most people keep a spare tire. One associate from that era said that when Silk first started taking money for hits, nobody in the city even knew who was doing it. People were saying it was a hitman from Detroit somewhere. It was not a hitman from Detroit. It was a man from L Street who slept in your yard and waited until the sun came up. In 1989, Rayful Edmond got locked up. The biggest supplier in D.C. was gone. His territory was wide open. Every corner, every strip, every block that Rayful had controlled was suddenly up for grabs. From Harlem, a flashy, smooth-talking dealer named Alpo Martinez looked at that vacancy the way a shark looks at blood in the water. Alpo was already famous. He had run with Rich Porter and Ozzie Faison, the three Harlem dealers whose story would become the movie Paid in Full, with Cameron playing Alpo's character. But Alpo had a problem. He had killed his own best friend, Rich Porter, over money. He shot him dead. And Rich Porter's 12-year-old brother, Donald, had been kidnapped for ransom and turned up dead. New York was burning for Alpo. He needed a new city. D.C. was the answer. But D.C. hustlers did not play with outsiders. And Alpo, for all his flash and all his money, knew he needed one thing he could not buy in Harlem. He needed a killer, not just any killer. He needed the killer, the one nobody in D.C. would challenge, the one whose name alone could clear a room. He needed Silk. There are two versions of how they met. Silk's version was that he wanted to kill Alpo before they ever shook hands. A woman had told Silk that Alpo was putting a hit on him. Silk went hunting. His close associate, Lil Pop, stepped in at the East Side Club and introduced them. Alpo begged for his life. Alpo's version was that he bailed Silk out of jail, and Silk was so grateful he became his bodyguard. The truth does not matter. What matters is the result. Silk became Alpo's enforcer, his hitman, his shield, the man who made sure nobody touched Alpo's operation anywhere in D.C., Virginia, or Maryland. And business exploded. The Martinez organization moved roughly 500 kilograms of product valued at $65 million through 4 states. Silk was the engine. Alpo was the mouth. Together, they were the most dangerous partnership in the murder capital. But it was never equal. It was never a partnership between two men. It was one man doing all the work and one man keeping all the records. Silk was the one dropping bodies. Silk was the one hunting targets in the dark. Silk was the one making sure Alpo could sleep safely at night. And Alpo? Alpo was taking notes, writing down names, memorizing details, building a file he did not know he was building yet, because Alpo was born with a gift that Silk never had and never understood, the ability to betray without hesitation. Between 1989 and 1991, the Martinez organization left 9 bodies across Washington, D.C. Federal authorities would later allege that Silk was the main shooter in 8 of those 9. Domenico Benson, a Brooklyn dealer who slapped Alpo's wife. Silk walked up to Benson while the man was shaking Alpo's hand, shaking his hand, and shot him dead right there, mid-handshake. Gary Terrell, a rival dealer in Washington, D.C., who made the mistake of putting a hit on Silk. Silk got to him first. He always got to them first. But the killing that tells you everything, the one that haunts this story, is Evelyn Carter. Carter was Silk's girlfriend. She was talking to police. They were investigating the murder of a dealer named Michael Frey Salters, and Carter had information that could connect Silk to the killing. But here is the twist that makes your stomach turn. According to Silk, he did not kill Frey. A member of his own crew, a man named Michael Jackson, killed Frey on Alpo's orders. Then Jackson went to Frey's funeral and told everyone Silk did it. Evelyn Carter heard the lie at that funeral, and Jackson, to cover himself, told Silk that Carter was the one running her mouth. So Silk, out of loyalty to a man who was framing him, killed the woman in his own life. After a Keith Sweat concert at Constitution Hall, Silk grabbed Evelyn Carter. He stabbed her in the face. He shot her 5 times, dead. Years later, in a prison cell, Silk said the following, "May she rest in peace. If I would have let her talk, she would have told me the truth. But I would not have listened because I stand for loyalty, and my loyalty was with that dude. That was my man, but he was a snake. He killed the one person who could have saved him because he was loyal to the one person who was destroying him. And he was about to find out just how loyal that person was in return." On November 6, 1991, federal authorities arrested Alpo Martinez. Drug charges, murder charges, conspiracy, everything. They put Alpo into a Washington, D.C. jail where half the inmates wanted him dead. Rivals, enemies, men who had been waiting for the day Alpo did not have Silk standing next to him. Who kept him alive? Silk. From inside the same jail system, Silk put the word out. Anyone who touches Alpo will not live to see the outside. Not a threat, a guarantee from the most feared man in the building. Nobody touched Alpo. Not one person. The most hated snitch to be in Washington, D.C., walked through that jail untouched because Wayne Perry said so. Now think about what is happening at the same time. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Alpo is sitting across from federal prosecutors, and he is singing. Every name, every body, every detail, every murder Silk committed. Every murder Silk did not commit that Alpo pinned on him anyway. The man Silk was protecting was the man burying him. The man Silk was willing to die for was the man signing his death warrant. Silk later said he was a very loyal man. He said he did not fear anything or anyone but God. The fear of weaker guys put him in prison. The fear of weaker guys. He is not talking about the feds. He is not talking about the police. He is talking about Alpo. The man who was too weak to stand up and take his own weight. The man who gave up everyone around him to save himself. The man who was weaker than anyone Silk had ever hunted on the streets of D.C. And that weak man's words put Silk in a cage for the rest of his life. December 4, 1992. Silk walked into court expecting to plead guilty to a minor charge, selling product to an undercover police officer, a fine, maybe a few months. Instead, the Safe Streets Task Force was waiting. They arrested him in the courtroom, and charged him with the murder of Garrett Terrell in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise. December 5, 1992. The Washington Times ran a headline saying, "Suspected hitman arrested in 1991 killing, March 6, 1993. The Washington Post reported a 27-count indictment. Wayne Perry, Tyrone Price, and Michael Jackson were charged with 9 murders, racketeering conspiracy, drug distribution conspiracy, retaliating against a witness, kidnapping, and robbery. And then the federal government did something that had not been done in D.C. since 1971. They sought the death penalty. Wayne Silk Perry was going to be the first person executed in the District of Columbia in over 20 years. The voters of D.C. had just rejected the death penalty by a 2-to-1 margin. But this was federal court, federal statute, and a 1987 law said murder in furtherance of a drug conspiracy was a death-eligible offense. They were measuring Silk for a casket, using Alpo's words as the tape measure. April 1, 1994. The Washington Post ran a headline that said, "Killer cop's plea gets life sentence in 5 murders." Silk pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, naming Domenico Benson, Evelyn Carter, Yolanda Burley, Alveda Hopkins, and Garrett Terrell, plus continuing criminal enterprise. In exchange, the death penalty came off the table. Silk told Don Diva that he had not copped out because of the death penalty. He said he lived to die, and that he copped out to make sure others did not get life. He said he took the bull by the horns to save others. That was the kind of man he was. Even at the end, even with the walls closing in, even knowing that Alpo had betrayed him, that everything he had built was gone, that he would never walk a free street again, he was still protecting other people. 5 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole, ever. They shackled him, handcuffed him, loaded him into a transport vehicle, and shipped him to ADX, Florence, Colorado, the federal supermax, the most secure prison in America, the place where they put the men the government never wants to see again. Silk was 31 years old. For snitching on Silk and dozens of others, Alpo Martinez received 35 years. Not 5 life sentences, 35 years, for confessing to 14 murders, including killing his own best friend, Rich Porter. Silk got life for 5. Alpo got 35 for 14. Read that again and tell me how it sits with you. In 2015, the federal government released Alpo, gave him a new name, Abraham Rodriguez, dropped him in Lewiston, Maine. Population 36,000, quiet town, polite neighbors. Nobody knew who he was. He helped old people take out their trash. But Alpo could not leave it alone. He could not be Abraham Rodriguez. By 2019, he was back in Harlem, making YouTube videos, bragging about the old days, riding motorcycles through the same blocks where he had sold product 30 years earlier, throwing away his witness protection like it was a used napkin. October 31st, 2021, Halloween night, 3:30 a.m., 147th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard, Harlem. Alpo Martinez was sitting in his red Dodge Ram pickup when somebody walked up to the driver's side window. 5 shots, chest, chin, arm. He drove 1 more block, crashed, and in his final moments, bleeding out in the driver's seat, he threw bags of product out the window. Still dealing, still hustling, still running the game. Even as he died, he was pronounced dead at Harlem Hospital. Rich Porter's family poured champagne in the streets. The man charged with the murder was acquitted in 2024. The killing remains effectively unsolved. Meanwhile, inside ADX Florence, behind concrete walls 3 feet thick, Silk sits. He converted to Islam, changed his name to Nkosi Shaka Zulu L. He has been in that cell for over 30 years. He will never leave. The man who snitched walked free and died on the street at 3 a.m., throwing supplies out his window. The man who stayed loyal will never breathe free air again. Washington, D.C. recorded 482 murders in 1991. The year Silk was at his peak. In 2012, that number dropped to 88. The streets Silk terrorized have coffee shops and condos now. The corners where people died have strollers on them. The murder capital is not the murder capital anymore. And the most feared man who ever walked its streets is locked in a box in Colorado, forgotten by everyone except the people who grew up in 203, the people who read Seth Ferrante's book, and the millions who heard Jay-Z say his name and had to look him up. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that makes this story different from every other gangster story on the internet. Silk was not brought down by the police. He was not brought down by a rival. He was not brought down by a task force or an investigation or a wire. He was brought down by the one person he loved enough to kill for, to protect in jail, to take 5 life sentences for. He was the greatest hunter the murder capital ever produced. He could find anyone, track anyone, wait all night in the dark for anyone. He could read the streets like a book. He could smell danger from a block away. But he could not see the snake sitting right next to him, eating his food, spending his money, calling him brother. Because loyalty blinded him, and loyalty, the same loyalty that made him the most feared and the most respected man in D.C., is what put him in that box. "I am a very loyal man," he said. "I don't fear nothing and no one but God. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison." 7 words. The fear of weaker guys put me in prison. He does not blame the feds. He does not blame the judge. He does not blame the system. He blames the weakness of the man he trusted. And that is the lesson. Not about guns, not about the streets, not about the murder capital. The lesson is this: the thing that makes you great can be the exact same thing that destroys you, and you will not see it coming, because it is not coming from your enemies. It is coming from the person sitting right next to you. Think about that. Number 2. February 6th, 1975. Orchard Lake, Michigan. Nice neighborhood, quiet streets, big lawns, the kind of place where nothing happens, where people sleep with their windows open. A rented Oldsmobile is speeding down a narrow road. It comes around a bend and nearly collides head-on with a patrol car. The cop hits his brakes. The Oldsmobile does not stop. High-speed chase. The Oldsmobile runs the police car off the road. More units called. Miles of pursuit through a Detroit suburb that has not seen a crime all year. They finally stop the car. Behind the wheel, a black man, 44 years old, scar tissue across his hands. Calm, not panicked, not running, just sitting there, like he had been expecting this moment his entire life. Officers search the vehicle. 2 semi-automatic pistols, a rifle, a sawed-off shotgun, several ounces of heroin, a stolen police uniform from Toledo, espionage equipment, cash, a lot of cash. But none of that is why 6 law enforcement agencies would spend the next 2 decades fighting over this case. In the trunk, notebooks, handwritten, meticulous, page after page after page, the names and home addresses of over 300 cops, judges, prosecutors, and politicians. The daily habits of recent murder victims documented before they were killed. Sealed grand jury files that no civilian should ever possess. Locations of every safe house, drug den, and witness in the city of Detroit. This man had been running a one-man intelligence operation more sophisticated than anything the Detroit Police Department had ever built. He had cops on payroll running license plates for him through the Law Enforcement Information Network. He had stolen a police uniform and badge. He kept surveillance equipment, disguises, aliases. The officers stared at the notebooks. Then they stared at the man. His name was Chester Wheeler Campbell. He had nicknames: Dr. Death, the Angel of Death, the Undertaker, 007. Federal authorities would later estimate he personally killed over 50 people. He was convicted of murder exactly once, in 1955. Never again. Every witness who tried to testify against him ended up dead. One was found in the protection wing of a maximum security federal prison with his throat cut and X's carved into his eyelids. When Campbell's lawyer was asked about the dead witness, he told the judge something that made the courtroom go silent. Chester does not need to be physically present to conduct business. And the most dangerous thing about Chester Wheeler Campbell was not his gun. It was not his body count. It was not even his near-genius IQ. It was the fact that the Italian Mafia, the Tocco Zerilli crime family, the same organization connected to the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, did not just tolerate this man. They needed him. They funded him. They staked his crew. They gave him their drug supply lines. Because Chester Wheeler Campbell was so good at what he did that Detroit's most powerful crime family could not operate without a black man doing their killing for them. This is the story they never told you. The real 007. The real John Wick. A man who dressed only in black, attended plays and museums, studied foreign languages, kept assassins' notebooks, and built a criminal empire so terrifying that both sides of the law wanted him dead. And when they finally caught him, he looked at his cellmate and said 7 words: "I'm a dead man. Whether I stay in here or get out, brother, I'm dead." Chester Wheeler Campbell was born in 1930 in Detroit. He was the 4th of 6 children. His father died when Chester was in the 2nd grade, and his mother raised 6 kids alone. Here is what made Chester different from every other gangster you have ever heard of. He was the only one in his family who went criminal. 5 siblings, all of them law-abiding, one mother doing her best, and one son who chose a different path. By the age of 15, he was incarcerated for burglary in 1946, a child in a cell. Whatever chance he had at a normal life ended before he could drive. By the age of 20, he faced 2 more burglary charges. His photograph was already displayed in the precinct station house. The cops knew his face, and they were watching him, waiting. They did not have to wait long. On July 1st, 1955, in Detroit, on Lawton Street, Chester was 24 years old. He and 2 partners, David Green and Watson Brooks, planned to rob a numbers spot, a gambling apartment. They masked their faces with handkerchiefs. They had 2 pistols between them. Outside the apartment, they encountered Luther Mixon, 43 years old, standing near an expensive car. The robbers demanded to know who owned it. Mixon said nothing. Campbell pistol whipped him. Mixon fell and tried to get back on his feet. Campbell fired a round into his face. Then they went inside the apartment. Inside were 4 people: John and Julia Jackson, Roosevelt Williams, and Emmett Carter. They robbed them all at gunpoint and beat them. Their total take was $420, including what they pulled from the pockets of the man bleeding out in the street. $420 for a man's life. They arrested Campbell the next day. An officer recognized him from the precinct wall photo, the same photo they had been staring at for years. The witnesses from the apartment identified him in a lineup. He was charged with first-degree murder in January 1956 and sent to Michigan State Prison, known as Jackson Prison, one of the most violent penitentiaries in America. Chester Wheeler Campbell walked in as a street robber who killed a man over $420. 13 years later, he walked out as something else entirely. Here's what nobody expected. Campbell didn't waste a single day inside Jackson Prison. While other inmates fought and gambled and waited for parole, Chester studied. He studied criminal law, homicide investigation techniques, and foreign languages. He read everything he could find: books on surveillance, books on espionage, books on forensics. He scored near genius level on a court-administered IQ test. He learned new criminal trades from the most dangerous men in Michigan: safe cracking, weapons, drug distribution networks, the economics of heroin, who controlled what in Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago. 13 years. That's how long Chester Wheeler Campbell spent preparing for what came next. In September 1969, he pleaded his case down to second-degree murder. The court transcript is chilling because of how calm he is. The judge asked, "Do you know where he was killed?" Campbell answered, "On the street." The judge said, "Tell me the circumstances." Campbell said, "In the process, I shot Mr. Mixon." The judge asked, "After that, what happened?" Campbell said, "I think I went through his pockets." He said it like he was recalling a trip to the grocery store. No remorse, no emotion, just facts. They paroled him in September 1969. He was 38 years old. Within 1 month, police suspected him in a double homicide. Jimmy Davis and his girlfriend Lisa were both shot execution style in the head while sitting in a parked car. Davis had been a protected witness in trials against heroin kingpin John Klassen. The man who was supposed to be safe, who the government promised to protect, was dead with a bullet in his brain within weeks of Chester Wheeler Campbell walking free. But they could not prove it. No witnesses, no evidence connecting Campbell directly. That became the pattern. That was always the pattern. And what Chester did next would make the Italian Mafia take notice. After prison, Chester Wheeler Campbell did not become a drug dealer. He did not become a gang leader. He did not try to build an empire. He became something far more valuable and far more dangerous: a freelance assassin, available to anyone who could pay his fee. His fee was $15,000 per hit, an astronomical, almost unheard of amount in Detroit in the 1970s. But people paid it because Chester Wheeler Campbell did not just kill. He was an artist of death. He wore only black, head to toe, every day, to accentuate what he called his morbid aura. He wanted you to see him coming and to know what he was before he opened his mouth. Here is the contradiction that made him terrifying. This man, this contract killer, spent his free time attending plays, browsing museums, and studying foreign languages. He was cultured, well-spoken, and surprisingly charming. He could walk into a room full of educated people and nobody would suspect what he was. Then he could walk out of that room and execute someone in a parked car before dinner. He used aliases, Augustus Miller and others. He maintained disguises. He had a stolen Toledo police uniform, complete with badge and commander's hat, that he used for surveillance and infiltration. The badge had been reported lost by a Toledo officer who said he misplaced it while helping a disabled motorist. Campbell had probably taken it from a corrupt cop on his payroll. And the notebooks. Always the notebooks. From the moment he left Jackson Prison, Chester began building something unprecedented: a personal intelligence database. Every contact, every conversation, every license plate, every address, every habit of every person, criminal or cop, who crossed his path. He gathered information through surveillance, gossip, shadowing, payoffs, and simply talking to people, from mobsters to motorcycle clubs, hookers to hitmen, pushers to pimps, Detroit to Cleveland. He made the rounds and he wrote everything down. This was not a street thug keeping a score sheet. This was a spy operation run by one man out of the trunk of a rented Oldsmobile. He even had access to the Law Enforcement Information Network, spelled LEIN. The police database. Cops on the drug lord's payroll would run plates for him. He could identify any car, find any address, and track any person. He once told friends at a bar, drink in hand with a slight grin, that he was one of God's unfortunate creatures. He said it like a joke. It was not a joke. Picture the Louisade Social Club, East Side Detroit, early 1970s, a private Italian social club. The kind of place where men in pressed shirts drink espresso and talk business in half sentences, where the walls have no ears because nobody walks in without an invitation. Anthony Giacalone, known as Tony Jack, sits at a table. His brother Vito Giacalone, known as Billy Jack, sits beside him. These are the street-level commanders of the Taco Zerilli crime family, the Detroit Mafia. Tony Jack would later become infamous as one of the men connected to the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa on July 30th, 1975. That's who we're talking about. A black man walks through the door, head to toe in black. Nobody stops him. Nobody questions him. In a room where no black man should be welcome, Chester Wheeler Campbell sits down at the table. Because the Giacalones had a problem. The heroin trade was exploding, and whoever controlled heroin controlled Detroit. But the old arrangement was dying. The quiet, black, gambling bosses, who had worked for the Italians for years, doing what they were told, staying in their lane, were being replaced. A new generation, independent thinkers, volatile drug kingpins, men who didn't want to pay tribute to the Italians anymore. The Giacalones needed someone who could move through Detroit's black neighborhoods without standing out. Someone who could enforce their heroin operations in territories where an Italian face meant a bullet. Someone whose reputation alone could keep an entire side of the city in line. They didn't find that man. That man found them. Chester Wheeler. Campbell had been freelancing since prison, killing for whoever paid. But the Giacalones offered something better than a fee. They offered infrastructure, supply lines, protection, money, a permanent position in the most powerful crime organization in Michigan. Not as an employee, not as a servant, as their chosen weapon. Campbell was placed in the East Side camp, connected to a crew of black enforcers working directly under the Giacalone wing. Contract killers, extortionists, drug traffickers, a subunit of the Italian Mafia staffed entirely by black men. They would later be called Murder Row, and Chester Wheeler Campbell was the reason anyone feared that name. Around late 1973, Campbell was introduced through mutual acquaintances in the Mafia to two young East Side heroin dealers, Frank Usher, known as Big Frank Nitti, and Harold Morton, known as the Hawk. The Giacalone brothers had given Usher his nickname, Big Frank Nitti, after the real Chicago mobster. That tells you everything about the relationship. The Italians weren't just doing business with these men. They were mentoring them, shaping them, building them in their own image. Usher and Morton had ambition. What they lacked was fear. Nobody was afraid of two young dealers. Every corner had young dealers. Then Chester Campbell walked in. Here's how it worked. A dealer owed money, hadn't paid in weeks, thought he could outrun the debt. Campbell didn't chase him, didn't threaten him. He just parked outside the man's house in the morning, in the same rented car, in the same all-black clothes, in the same spot. For 3 days, never got out, never knocked, never said a word. On the 4th day, the man walked out with an envelope full of cash and handed it through the window. That was Chester when things went well. When things didn't go well, bodies turned up in parked cars with bullets in the back of the head and no witnesses within miles. With Campbell's reputation, the Giacalone brothers' money and supply lines, and Usher's ambition, Murder Row became the most powerful drug operation in the entire state of Michigan. Not Detroit, not the East Side, the entire state. The Michigan Federated Democratic Social Club in Midtown became their headquarters. From there, Murder Row expanded operations citywide: gambling, extortion, prostitution. But heroin was the engine. Heroin was always the engine. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. Through all of this, the killings, the heroin, the Italian Mafia, Chester's mother was still alive, still in Detroit, still the same woman who raised 6 kids alone after her husband died. 5 of those kids turned out fine, church-going, law-abiding. And then there was Chester, the son who dressed in all black and came home for dinner with blood on his reputation and cash in his pockets that his mother knew better than to ask about. She never disowned him. He never stopped visiting. That's the part of Chester Wheeler Campbell that doesn't fit the legend. The part that reminds you he was a human being. A man who scored near genius on an Ike test, who could have been anything, who had a mother who loved him, and who chose to become the most feared killer in Detroit anyway. Because everyone in that city's underworld knew the same thing. If you crossed Murder Row, Chester would find you. He already had your name in his notebook. He already knew your address. He already knew what car you drove. The question wasn't whether he could find you. The question was whether you'd see him first. Chester Campbell was suspected in at least 10 homicide investigations between 1969 and 1975. 10 that police knew about. The real number, according to federal authorities, was north of 50. He was never convicted. Not because police didn't try. They tried constantly. They built cases. They found witnesses. They prepared prosecutions. Then the witnesses died. In 1971, he was charged with intent to murder a star witness in a drug trial. The charges were dropped before trial. Then came the Roy Parsons case, a 1972 murder. Police had their witness, a man named James Lee Newton, street name Watusi Slim. Watusi Slim wasn't some random bystander. He was a one-time Campbell confidant and business partner. He knew everything. He could connect Chester to murders going back years. The prosecution thought they finally had the case that would put Campbell away forever. They put Watusi Slim in protective custody, a maximum security federal prison in Ohio. The protection wing, the safest place the government could put a human being short of an underground bunker. It didn't matter. Watusi Slim was found dead, throat cut, eyelids marked with X's, in the protection wing of a maximum security federal prison. The X's on the eyelids. Think about that. That wasn't just murder. That was a message to every potential witness in every pending case against Chester Wheeler Campbell: we can reach you anywhere, even in the one place the government swears is safe. All murder charges against Campbell were dropped. His lawyer stood before the judge and said it plainly. No shame, no apology. Words that echoed through Detroit's legal system like a gunshot. Chester doesn't need to be physically present to conduct business. The judge heard it. The prosecutors heard it. Every cop in Detroit heard it, and nobody could do a thing about it. February 6th, 1975, the night that changed everything. Chester was driving to his girlfriend's home in Orchard Lake, a wealthy suburb. Campbell had been living 2 lives, killer in the streets of Detroit and gentleman caller in the quiet suburbs. His girlfriend's house was full of his belongings, weapons, documents, and more notebooks. He came around a bend and nearly hit a patrol car. Instead of stopping, instead of showing his license and playing it cool like any smart criminal would, Chester Wheeler. Campbell hit the gas. High-speed chase through a suburb that had never seen one. He ran a police car off the road. More units joined. They finally stopped him. The car was a gold mine. 2 semi-automatic pistols, a rifle, a sawed-off shotgun, several ounces of heroin, and the notebooks. When they searched his house in Detroit and his girlfriend's home in Orchard Lake, the picture got worse. documents bearing the names, addresses, and personal details of cops, politicians, judges, gangsters, addicts, witnesses, and prosecutors, sealed grand jury files, espionage equipment, the stolen Toledo police uniform and badge, an estimated $250,000 in cash, and a list, what prosecutors would call a hit list, the names and daily habits of people who were already dead, alongside names of people who were still alive. The implication was obvious. The living names were next. Among those names, L. Brooks Patterson, a well-known assistant prosecutor in Oakland County, who would later call Campbell absolutely incorrigible and a dedicated recidivist. 6 law enforcement agencies, Detroit Police, Oakland County, Wayne County, the FBI, the DEA, and the ATF, immediately began fighting over the notebooks. Not cooperating, fighting, because whoever controlled Chester Campbell's intelligence had leverage over the entire Detroit underworld and the police forces that were supposed to be clean. The corruption ran that deep. The Detroit Free Press uncovered it obsessively. The notebooks didn't just expose criminals, they exposed the true extent of Detroit's rot. Cover-ups, bribes, homicides, espionage, racism, addiction, rampant greed. And Chester knew it. In his cell, he reportedly told a fellow inmate, "I'm a dead man. Whether I stay in here or get out, brother, I'm dead." He wasn't wrong, just not in the way he expected. With Campbell locked up, Murder Row was finished. Not immediately, but inevitably. Chester had been the fear. Without him, the crew was just drug dealers with guns, and Detroit had 1,000 of those. The power inside Murder Row shifted. A lieutenant named Doc Holliday, real name Clarence Hillary, had been waiting for his moment. With Chester gone, Doc decided the leadership needed to change, violently. One night in 1979, at the Michigan Federated Democratic Social Club, Murder Row's own headquarters, Doc Holliday ordered 3 men killed. Not rivals, not enemies. His own people, James McJoy, Herbert Jackson, Alvin Clark. 3 Murder Row members who had sided with Frank Usher over Doc in the internal struggle for control. They were shot. Then it got worse. Doc ordered the bodies dismembered, heads removed, limbs separated, body parts placed into garbage bags. And he forced Frank Usher, the founder of Murder Row, the man the Giacalones had personally mentored, to participate, to pick up a blade and cut apart the bodies of men who had been loyal to him. While it happened, Doc Holliday popped a bottle of champagne, lit a fat cigar, and celebrated. Then he sent 2 men to dump the garbage bags. They were sloppy. The remains were found. The case unraveled. Usher was convicted. Doc Holliday was acquitted, but the streets have their own justice system. In 1983, someone walked up to Doc while he was having a drink at a Detroit night spot and shot him dead. The Giacalone brothers watched all of this from a distance. They had lost their enforcer. Then they had lost their crew. The most powerful black drug operation in Michigan, the one they had personally funded and built, destroyed itself in 4 years without Chester Wheeler Campbell to hold it together. They moved on. They always moved on. New crews, new enforcers, new faces, but they never found another Chester. Campbell was convicted on weapons and drug charges in Oakland County, 40 to 60 months. Wayne County added 20 to 30 months under the habitual offender statute, federal charges for the sawed-off shotgun stacked on top. He fought for his money from prison. He filed dozens of legal briefs. He railed against everyone. The courts actually ruled in his favor and ordered the $250,000 returned. But by then, the IRS had taken it. The money was gone forever. He also orchestrated things from inside. A plot to kidnap 4 judges was discovered and traced back to Campbell while he was sitting in Oakland County Jail. All 20 of Detroit's Recorder's Court judges received extra security from a man in a cell. Chester doesn't need to be physically present to conduct business. September 1984. He was paroled. He walked out into a different Detroit. Murder Row was dead. The Giacalones had moved on. The heroin game had changed. Crack was coming. New players, young players, players who had never heard of Chester Wheeler Campbell. But Chester didn't know how to be anything else. April 1985, 7 months after release, somebody shot Chester Wheeler Campbell multiple times in the leg and thigh. An 11-hour surgery saved his life. Reporters showed up at the hospital. Cameras, microphones, questions about who shot him, why, and what he planned to do about it. Chester Wheeler Campbell, the man who had killed 50 people, who had the Italian Mafia on speed dial, who had kept notebooks on every cop in Detroit, looked at the reporters and said, "I don't have anything newsworthy to say." Then he went back to work. In 1987, déjà vu, Chester Wheeler Campbell was pulled over again. Same story, different year. A carload of guns, drugs, explosives, spy gear. Prosecutor L. Brooks Patterson, the same man whose name had appeared in Campbell's notebooks 12 years earlier, stood in court and called Campbell absolutely incorrigible, a dedicated recidivist and a heavy-duty criminal. The sentence was 40 years. Chester was 57 years old. He was never coming home, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. For the next 14 years, Chester Wheeler Campbell sat in a federal prison. The man who only wore black. The man who went to museums and plays. The man who studied foreign languages and kept a spy operation in his trunk. The man the Italian Mafia chose above all others. He died on a prison bed in a federal medical facility in 2001. The official cause of death was end-stage liver disease, hepatitis C, natural causes. Chester Wheeler Campbell, Dr. Death, the Angel of Death, the Undertaker, 007, died of natural causes. He was 71 years old. Here's what stays with me. Chester Wheeler. Campbell killed over 50 people. He was convicted of murder exactly once in 1955 for $420. He spent 30 of his 71 years behind bars. Not for the 50-plus murders, for guns, for drugs, for being caught with the wrong things in the wrong car at the wrong time. Every witness who tried to put him away for what he actually did ended up dead, including one in the most protected facility the United States government could provide. Throat cut, X marks on his eyelids. The Italian Mafia, one of the most powerful crime organizations in American history, chose a black man from Detroit as their most trusted weapon. Not an employee, not a tool, a partner. A man they funded, protected, and needed. And the thing that scared everyone, cops, mobsters, prosecutors, judges, drug dealers, witnesses, wasn't the guns, it wasn't the body count, it was the notebooks. Because Chester Wheeler Campbell understood something that most criminals never grasp. Information is more dangerous than any weapon ever made. A bullet kills one person. A notebook with the right names, the right addresses, the right secrets, controls an entire city. He gathered intelligence the way a spy would: surveillance, payoffs, shadowing, contacts. He tracked everyone, and he wrote it all down. When they found those notebooks in the trunk of that Oldsmobile, 6 law enforcement agencies went to war with each other, not to bring Campbell to justice, but to control the information he had collected. Inside those pages were every dirty secret Detroit had been hiding for a decade. Those notebooks were the real weapon. That's the real story of Chester Wheeler Campbell. Not just a hitman, not just a killer. A man who turned knowledge into the most terrifying weapon in Detroit. The real John Wick did not exist in a movie. He drove a rented Oldsmobile through Orchard Lake, Michigan. The only thing that stopped him was not a rival gang, not the FBI, not the Italian Mafia. It was a narrow road and a patrol car coming the other direction. One near collision. That was all that separated Chester Wheeler Campbell from never being caught at all. Number 3. Imagine you are a kingpin in New York City in 1986. You run a crew. You move kilos. You have $100,000 in cash sitting in a shoebox under your bed. You have bodyguards at every door. You have rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies watching every car that turns down your block. You have cops on your payroll. You have judges on your payroll. You have your own mother driving a Mercedes because you paid for it in cash. Nobody can touch you. Rivals won't dare. The feds are still figuring out what crack even is. Every man on your block owes you something. You are untouchable. And then you come home one night and you see a car parked across the street that you don't recognize. You stop walking. You feel your heart speed up. You heard something at a club last weekend. Somebody said a name, the Baldens. You heard they hit a spot in Harlem last week and left 4 people dead in a kitchen. You heard they hit a stash house in Jamaica, took $100,000 in cash, and the 2 men guarding it, nobody ever heard from them again. You heard they don't sell, they only take. You heard they don't need money, they just want to take yours. You heard they are hunting kingpins, not for territory, not for revenge, not for business, but for fun. Just for the sake of saying they did it. Just to add one more name to a list they keep in their heads. Just to laugh about it later in some apartment in Queens while they count your cash. You stare at that car across the street. You put your hand on the gun in your waistband. You realize for the first time in your entire life as a kingpin, you are scared. Scared of a family. 4 brothers and their cousin. A regular black family from Queens. Mother and father in the house. No crew, no empire, no territory, no supplier. Just 5 men with nothing to lose and guns in their hands. Their last name was Balden, and in 1986 they were the only thing in New York City that scared the kings. This is the story of the Balden brothers, the family that hunted kingpins for sport. The Balden brothers did not come out of a broken home. That is the first thing that makes their story different. Most YouTube gangster stories start the same way. Father gone, mother working 3 jobs, crack in the house, projects full of violence. Kid turns to the streets at 12. That was not the Baldens. Their parents were both in the house, mother and father, Queens, New York, working people, a normal middle-class black household in the 1970s, the kind of family where you went to church on Sunday, where you said yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, where you did your homework at the kitchen table. There were 4 brothers. Curtis was the oldest, big, quiet, physical, the kind of man who did not need to say much because when he walked in a room, everyone felt it. Henry was next, the shooter, the one with the temper, the one who would pull the trigger when nobody else would. Ernest was after that, the youngest of the 3 shooters, hungry, reckless, always wanted to prove he was as bad as his older brothers. Robert was the youngest, the driver, the quiet one, the last to join. And then there was the cousin, Isaac. Isaac practically lived at the Balden house growing up. He was raised more as a 5th brother than as a cousin. He ate at the Balden dinner table. He slept in the Balden bedroom. His last name was different, but his blood might as well have been the same. Isaac was the one who would change the family forever. Because Isaac had a gift that nobody else in the family had. Isaac could see things other people couldn't. He could look at a drug operation, and within a week he would know exactly where the money was, where the product was, where the guards took their breaks, where the girlfriend lived, where the mother lived, where the kingpin slept on Tuesday nights. The streets called Isaac by a name that told you everything about him. Just me. No crew, no backup, no partners, just me. And in 1984, Just Me sat his 4 brothers down and told them the idea that was going to make them rich and kill every last one of them. Here's what Just Me figured out. He was 18 years old, barely out of high school, and he had looked around Queens and seen something nobody else had seen yet. Drug dealers could not call the police. Think about that for a second. A corner kid selling crack just made $4,000 in cash by sunset. Lieutenants were carrying $50,000 in duffel bags. Kingpins were sitting on millions in single apartments. All of it, every last dollar, was illegal money. If somebody kicked in the door and took it, the dealer had exactly 0 options. Call the cops? The cops would ask where the $50,000 came from. The dealer would talk his way straight into a federal prison cell. Call a lawyer? Same problem. So what did the dealer do? Nothing. He took the loss. He made up a story for his supplier. He hoped it never happened again. And Just Me realized that this was the perfect crime. No police report, no detective, no trial, no prison. Just free money. Sitting in apartments all over New York City, protected only by the reputation of the men who owned it. And reputations, Just Me told his brothers, don't stop bullets. The Baldens started small. Nobody starts by robbing Fat Cat. They hit small-time hustlers, corner supervisors, dealers who worked 3 blocks. Just Me would scout the spot for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes a month. He'd watch from a parked car. He'd follow the product back to the stash apartment. He'd learn which window the guard looked out of. He'd learn what time the girlfriend came home with groceries. Then the brothers would hit. Curtis's muscle, kicking down the door or walking in calm and putting a gun to the closest head. Henry. On the main gun, the eyes of the operation, watching everyone inside the apartment. Ernest on the back door, making sure nobody slipped out. Robert in the car outside, engine running. 3 minutes in, 3 minutes out. The first few hits got them a few $1,000s apiece, then $10,000, then $50,000. By early 1985, the Baldens had robbed so many small-time spots in Queens that word was starting to get around. A family, a black family from Queens. They don't sell, they only take, and they take from us. The word reached the bigger crews. But the bigger crews weren't worried, because the bigger crews had soldiers, security, lookouts on the roof with walkie-talkies. Kingpins in Queens operated out of apartments with steel-reinforced doors. Every delivery was escorted. Every stash house had 3 men inside, armed at all times. The bigger crews figured no family with 5 guys was coming for them. The bigger crews were wrong. In the summer of 1986, the Baldens crossed the bridge. Harlem in 1986 was the richest black neighborhood in America. Rich Porter was 21 years old and already a millionaire. Alpo Martinez was 20 and had a collection of luxury cars that would embarrass a movie star. AZ Faison was making $100,000 a week. All 3 of them operated out of apartments in Harlem. Apartments full of cash, full of product, full of jewelry that any jeweler in Manhattan would have paid 6 figures for. Just Me picked AZ. Why AZ? Because AZ was the richest and Ozzy was the quietest. AZ avoided beef. AZ did not have a violent reputation like Alpo. AZ did not have street politics like Rich Porter. AZ just had money, lots and lots of money. Just Me watched Ozzy's operation for weeks. He figured out where Ozzy kept his cash. He figured out who Ozzy trusted. He figured out which apartment held the real stash. And on a summer afternoon in 1986, The Baldens kicked down AZ's door. What happened next would be whispered about in Harlem for the next 30 years. AZ Faison was in the kitchen. 4 of his closest people were with him. Cash on the table, product in the back room. Henry Balden came in first, gun up. He started shooting immediately. The first of Ozzy's people dropped. The second, the third, the fourth. All 4 men dead on the kitchen floor in under 60 seconds. AZ took 9 bullets, 9, in his head, in his chest, in his arms, in his legs. He collapsed against the kitchen cabinet, blood pouring out of him, eyes closing. Henry Balden stepped over his body, walked past the 4 dead friends, and grabbed the cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jewelry. Product. The Baldens walked out of that apartment in under 3 minutes. Ozzy Faison was left on the floor, bleeding to death. He should have died that day. 9 bullets, a kingpin with 4 dead friends around him. Nobody in Harlem expected Ozzy to live, but Ozzy lived. Doctors worked on him for hours. They dug bullets out of places human bodies are not supposed to have bullets. They told his mother he would not walk again. Then they told her he would not talk again. Then they told her he would have brain damage. Ozzy came out of the hospital weeks later able to walk and talk. And Ozzy made a decision that no kingpin had ever made in New York history. Ozzy testified. He walked into a courtroom. He pointed at Henry Balden. He told a jury exactly what happened in that apartment. Henry Balden went to prison, but the other Baldens were still free. And the word that went out to every kingpin in New York City after the Ozzy robbery was simple. These men will kill you, even if they do not mean to. They will shoot everyone in the room and take your money, and they will walk away laughing. And every kingpin in Harlem, in Queens, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, every one of them changed their routines that week. Fat Cat Nichols, who was in prison by 1986, but still running his Queens operation through messengers, heard about the Ozzy robbery. He doubled security on every stash house. Alpo Martinez heard about it. He started sleeping in a different apartment every night. Supreme McGriff heard about it. His nephew Prince was running the Supreme team on the ground. They added rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies over the entire Baisley Park houses. Every crew in New York City changed how they operated in the summer of 1986. Because of a family from Queens, because of 5 men with guns. The Baldens weren't the biggest crew in New York. They weren't the richest. They weren't the most numerous. But they had something the Kingpins didn't have. The Kingpins had empires. The Kingpins had corners, crews, distribution networks, suppliers, soldiers. The Baldens had nothing to lose. They didn't care about territory. They didn't care about respect. They didn't care about long-term power. All they wanted was what you had, and they would kill every single person in your apartment to get it. That's the kind of enemy that terrifies a kingpin, because a kingpin can negotiate with a rival. A kingpin can call a truce with another dealer. A kingpin can split territory with a competitor. You can't negotiate with a stick-up crew. Stick-up crews don't want your territory. They want what's inside it. And once they've taken it, there's nothing left to talk about. For 3 years, the Baldens lived the life every black kid in Queens dreamed about. They drove luxury cars. They wore designer clothes. They tipped valet drivers $100 for parking. They walked into nightclubs and ordered every bottle on the menu. Just Me bought his mother a new house. He kept his old address, though, the house he grew up in, with the concrete steps out front. That's where he slept when he needed to disappear. That's where he kept his real money. The brothers rotated between apartments in Queens and the Bronx, never more than 3 nights in the same bed. And they kept hitting. They hit a Supreme Team stash house, and walked out with over $100,000 in cash. They hit a fat cat spot in Queens. They took the product, they took the money, and they left the guards tied up on the floor. They hit dealers in Brooklyn. They hit the Bronx. They even hit some Dominican operators in Washington Heights, men who would later become some of the most feared cartels on the East Coast. The Baldens didn't care. By 1987, the Balden family had taken in an estimated $2 million in cash through stick-ups alone. $2 million. Most legitimate businesses in Queens didn't make $2 million in a decade. The Baldens made it in 3 years, in apartments at gunpoint from men who couldn't call the police. But they made one mistake they didn't understand yet. Every robbery created an enemy. Every dollar they took came from a man with soldiers, money, and time. And by the summer of 1987, those men had decided the Baldens had stolen from them for the last time. The first Balden to die was Ernest. He was 23 years old. He was in Baltimore, Maryland, laying low while the heat in New York cooled off. He had a young woman with him. She was 19. One night, 2 men walked up on Ernest near a Baltimore apartment complex. They shot him until he stopped moving. They shot the woman too. Ernest Balden died in designer clothes and fresh sneakers. His body lay on the pavement until someone called it in. By then, his body was cold. His family back in New York got the news, and they didn't stop. Which is the craziest part of this whole story. Ernest was dead. Their little brother, gunned down out of state. The Baldens kept robbing kingpins because they didn't know how to stop. Because robbing kingpins was the only thing they knew how to do. Because at 24, 25, 26 years old, they had already made more money and lived bigger than most people ever do. There was no going back to a regular life now, so they kept hitting spots. That decision would end everything. August 6, 1987, Queens, New York, Isaac. Just me. Balden pulls up to his mother's house. He has been awake for 2 straight days. He has cash in his pocket. He has just finished scouting a new target. He is exhausted. He walks up the concrete steps of the house he grew up in. The same steps he had walked up as a 5-year-old, as a 12-year-old, as an 18-year-old planning his first robbery. He has his keys in his hand. He does not see the 2 men waiting in the shadows. The first bullet hits him in the back. The second. The third. Just me drops on the concrete steps. His mother is inside the house. She hears the gunfire. She runs to the front door. She opens it and she sees her son bleeding out on the porch of the house she raised him in. She drops to her knees. She screams his name. Just me looks up at her. He dies on the ambulance ride to the hospital. He was 25 years old. Across town that same week, Henry Balden, already out on bail after the Aziz case, out on appeal, back in the Bronx, back in the streets, was ambushed at his apartment. Henry took bullets too, but Henry survived. Henry would never rob another kingpin in his life. Curtis and Robert heard about just me and Henry, and for the first time in 3 years, the Balden family understood something. The game was over. For years, everyone in New York wondered the same thing. How did they find Just Me? Just Me was a ghost. He slept in different apartments every night. He did not use his real name. He did not have a phone in his name. He did not have a car in his name. He did not even have a mailing address in his name. How did 2 killers end up waiting for him on his mother's front porch? The answer came out years later, in a courtroom, in federal trial testimony. There was a woman named Ina McGriff. She was a parole officer in New York State. Middle-aged, respected, trusted, she was also on the payroll of the Supreme Team, the Queens crack crew that the Baldens had robbed, the crew run by Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his nephew Prince. Prince Miller paid Ina McGriff $3,000 in cash to look up the Balden family in the New York State parole system. She pulled every file, every address, every known relative. She handed Prince a sheet of paper. On that paper was Henry Balden's address in the Bronx and the address of Just Me Balden's mother in Queens. $3,000. That was the price of Just Me's life. Later, when news reports mentioned a Balden had been shot in Queens, Ina McGriff asked Prince about it. Was that the same Balden she had given the address for? Prince did not answer yes, did not answer no. He just smirked. She knew. By 1988, the Balden family had been broken. Just Me was dead. Ernest was dead. Henry was alive, but never the same, a shell of the shooter he had been. Curtis kept trying for a while. Small spots, local hits, but without Just Me's planning, he was working half-blind. He was eventually locked up on lesser charges. Robert, the youngest, disappeared from the streets. The Balden mother was left in a house in Queens. Her son's blood still remembered on the front steps. Her other sons in prison or scared. She had watched her family rise from a middle-class household in the 1970s to the most feared stick-up crew in New York City. And she had watched them come apart in 3 years. Today, nobody raps about the Baldens. Nas rapped about Pappy Mason. Jay-Z rapped about Rich Porter. Cameron made a movie about Alpo. The Kings got remembered. The men who terrified them didn't. But every kingpin in New York City in the summer of 1987 slept a little easier after Just Me died. Because for 3 years, 5 men from a regular Queens family had made the richest drug dealers in America afraid to go home at night. Here's what the Balden story really tells you. Fear doesn't follow money. Fear doesn't follow power. Fear doesn't follow territory. Fear follows nothing to lose. The kingpins of New York City had everything. Millions of dollars, cars, women, respect, corners, crews. All the Baldens had was each other and a willingness to die. And that was enough to make every king in the city afraid. That's why the streets talk about the Baldens in whispers 30 years later, even when the rap songs don't. Because everybody who ever sold a kilo of crack in the 1980s knew the same thing. You could have all the money in the world. You could have bodyguards. You could have rooftop lookouts. You could have steel-reinforced doors. None of it mattered. If Just Me Balden decided you were next, you were next. And the only reason they stopped terrorizing the kingpins of New York City is because Ina McGriff sold an address for $3,000. Otherwise, the Baldens might still be robbing spots today. In 1986, there were 3 men every black kid in New York City wanted to be: Alpo, Rich Porter, AZ. But there were 5 men those 3 men were afraid of: Curtis Balden, Henry Balden, Ernest Balden, Robert Balden, and their cousin Isaac, the one the streets called Just Me. A family from Queens, 4 brothers and their cousin. They didn't sell drugs, they didn't build an empire, they didn't control territory, they just took from the richest, most feared men in New York City. For 3 years, they lived bigger than any of their childhood friends could imagine. Then their little brother died in Baltimore. Then their cousin died on his mother's front steps. Then their brother survived a Bronx ambush and went silent forever. 3 years of terrifying the kings of New York. 3 years of taking what they wanted. And in the end, nothing left but a mother on a porch, holding her dying son in a house she had raised him in. That's the Balden brothers, the family that made the kings of New York afraid.